Hey guys, welcome to a new series type thing we're going to be trying out. I've noticed there's a lot more startups and new hosts popping up, and a lot of them are making very trivial basic mistakes. And even when Crident was started up, there were a lot of trivial basic mistakes made on our behalf. So this is a series to just generally help new people starting up do so more efficiently and get themselves on their feet really quickly. We'll go into a lot more details with this series. We'll actually go into really the configuration level on things like WHMCS and even TC admin, and we'll dive into the more marketing side and all that. What we're going to start off with though, to kind of get a bit of a response on how useful this series would be, I'm going to go over some very kind of basic questions that I get asked a lot, and also some other questions which people have just asked me for the sake of this video. The most common thing I get asked by far is how do we get started? How do you start up a company, a host, startup? Ultimately, the answer is pretty trivial when it comes to this. It's just do. Like, sometimes there's a lot of planning, a lot of thinking that goes into it. I don't really believe in that. I believe you just have to throw yourself into a situation and just make it work. You can't plan or foresee everything. All the issues you're going to run into, you just have no idea they're there. So you just got to throw yourself into the situation and deal with things as they happen, ultimately. One thing which is probably the biggest mistake in most hosts is they start up with this business type kind of mentality. There's a difference really between a startup and a business. A startup, you've really got to minimize costs. You've really got to do as much as you can yourself. There's a saying which I believe originated from someone called Gary Vaynerchuk, and that is clouds and dirt. With startups, you've 100% got to run it clouds and dirt. You've got to be this person really overviewing everything and making sure from the big overview and grand scheme of things, everything's running smoothly. But you've also got to be the guy on the floor, on the ground level, building things, making the website, making design, maybe designing the logo, putting out content, supporting customers. You've really got to be clouds and dirt. At the beginning, there won't be enough work for you to just focus on either clouds or dirt. You've really just got to do everything. You've really got to jump in, do a bit of everything, and there will be some things you're not good at, some things you won't intrinsically be very good at, and you'll find difficult and you might not enjoy. And at a later date, they're the things that you typically bring people in to help out with, and we'll kind of touch a little bit on when you should bring people in, and when you bring people in, kind of what we should look for that in a minute. The second most kind of frequent question I get asked is how do you market a brand or a hosting company, because there's a lot of competition. So with this one, this answer's like gonna always change essentially. There's not one definitive way, and there never will be. And if anybody tells you there is, and you see those master classes and they're like, give me $50 and you get an ebook, that stuff obviously never works for a very valid reason. Marketers ruin everything. As soon as there is a way to get your product in people's minds and get their attention, you can be damn sure that marketers are going to absolutely destroy that until it is the most obnoxious, annoying thing, and people just start to block out the adverts. So TV is an absolutely great example. Radio, even before TV existed, didn't have adverts, and then people thought, oh, everybody's attention is on this radio. I can utilize that time, their attention, to try and sell them something. And now, radio and TV is adverts all the time. And you're even paying for TV normally too, on top of that, and they're still throwing adverts in there. So, yeah, that's a kind of art. You've got to try and notice and reverse engineer what your customers are doing, or the people that you want to be your customers are doing. And you've got to find things where their attention is, but other, especially when you're a startup, other marketers aren't exploiting already and taking advantage of. For example, you've got things like forums. They're typically a pretty good way, and it's becoming more and more common that there's people that really kind of bomb forums. Things like Minecraft, for example, that'll be absolutely rinsed. But you've really got to find ways that other people aren't utilizing, and you've got to take advantage of that. Ultimately, when you're a startup though, you don't want to be targeting advertising channels like Google AdWords, for example. It's never going to be worth it for you. The cost per click won't line up with the amount that people will actually convert to sales. Test a lot of things, play with a lot of things, reverse engineer what your customers are doing, and just see where their attention is. And ultimately, one thing which I don't think is valued enough in marketing, provide value to people. If you can give, and keep on putting out so much content and material that people consume, eventually they'll, your brand gets into their mind, and then they might buy. They might not, but the point is you've got to give. Going back to somebody who I mentioned earlier, Gary Vaynerchuk, once again, he originated a saying, and I believe he also has a book on it called Jab, 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 Right Hook. And that's the same kind of principle there. So when it comes to marketing your brand, you've really got to look for unique and kind of strange and interesting ways to market that the bigger corporations are too busy to even notice or even take advantage of. That's one thing you can utilize. You're small, you have a lot of time, so you can do that. So that's marketing. We'll actually go into marketing a lot more depth later on in the series if we carry it on. Another really, really common one actually is when and how do I start bringing people into a host? So this is the one thing that I see a lot of startup hosts, in my opinion, do wrong. They start up with like 5 people involved in the startup, and that's necessary for some things, like some GoFundMe campaigns. They've got a lot of content and a lot of product they need to shift, and for them to bring in people, it makes sense. But for you to start up a host, you don't know if it's going to work. So along with obviously investing as little money as possible when you start it up, because you don't want to throw a ton of money into it, buy a ton of hardware, it doesn't work out, and it's all a waste. The same applies with people. People will often, I find, bring your mentality down. A lot of people expect instant results, and when you start up with other people, they might have expectations that don't line up with yours, and you might even know that yet, and that's a revelation at a later date, and that causes an issue. They might think that they should be paid more, and all these kind of crazy things. So ultimately, I believe you just shouldn't. You shouldn't bring people in for as long as you can, and then when you start getting to a point where it's actually going well and this is actually decent, that's when you want to start considering bringing somebody into the project, in my opinion. And this is something that's very critical. Take your time to work out who you want to bring into it. You need somebody whose views really line up with yours, but more importantly than that, because you're a startup, chances are you can't pay them a full wage. If you can even pay them at all, you shouldn't really be even getting paid yourself with a startup. You should be reinvesting all that money. So you've got to find someone who's got that startup drive, that real kind of drive and energy. They're the kind of people you want to bring in. Typically though, these are the younger people. So if you're like 20, around that kind of age, and you're starting up a host, other 20-year-olds, they'll be kind of delusional. They'd have had jobs which pay them full wages and all that stuff. So you really kind of want to find younger people who have that drive. They're not used to a full kind of wage or anything like that. And often they'll actually work harder. You've got to find people that enjoy what they do. That's probably the most important thing. Enjoying what you do. Then it's not so much like a job, and you can do it without necessarily being paid. Yeah, bringing people in, that's something you just want to avoid. You can't obviously offer 24/7 support, and you shouldn't try to do that when you've just start up a host. There's no reason for that. So I have a bit of a controversial view there. I know a lot of hosts that do start with like 5 people, and they're all mates, and they may not be taking a pay. But then when they start taking a pay, that's you can't possibly use all them people to work. There's just not enough stuff to do at first, and it'll be very disorganized. Yeah, that is obviously subjective. All of this stuff is just really from my experience. I've been running hosts for about 2-3 years now. Trident, which is the current one, that's been running for about a year, although that was renamed from Protected Hosting, which was a host that started in 2015. I never really pushed it or marketed it, or even really took it seriously until about 2016, mid 2016, is when I really started focusing on the host. Otherwise, the host was quite literally a means of driving down costs for a gaming community I ran. What skills and knowledge is required? This is something that somebody asked me, and it's quite an interesting one. It kind of ties into another question which someone asked me, but I'll answer them separately because otherwise it could get a little bit confused. You've got access to the internet now, so I don't think there's anything you really need to know necessarily. Like, there's the obvious stuff, which is, customer satisfaction is 100% critical, more so than profit. And as long as you understand that and you take that more importantly than making a buck, I think you're good to go. And you just utilize the internet and really kind of do your market research and stuff like that. It's a very broad question, but I guess I'll answer the more detailed things because there are some of the questions in a minute. So, for example, one thing is how do you know which hardware or servers to buy, or even which host to buy from? Because at first, obviously, you aren't running your own data center. So this is a kind of complicated one, and it obviously depends on where in the world you're, targeting, and all that various stuff. It really does depend. But one company which I've had a really good track record with, OVH, they have a very controversial track record. They're very hit and miss. Sometimes they can be shite, sometimes they can be really, really good. You speak to two different people and it's like they're speaking about a whole different company sometimes. It's quite shocking. That, I think it just comes down to what level of service you expect. So with OVH, for example, it's quite cheap, really. So you shouldn't be expecting the kind of service which you'd be providing to your customers because, you're making profit selling the game servers, so you're ultimately charging a bit more. You should expect them to be a bit hands-off. Depending on your pre-existing level of knowledge when it comes to maintaining servers and running servers, that depends what host you should go with. If you don't know really anything about running servers, then you might want to start with a managed host. If you're pretty confident, then you might want to go with an unmanaged host like OVH, for example. OVH are an infrastructure as a service, so ultimately their goal isn't to sell servers to customers and consumers. Their goal is to enable companies to build their infrastructure within OVH's infrastructure to then sell to end consumers. So what you use there is really kind of depending on your situation, but regarding the hardware, this obviously depends on the software you're running. One really kind of obvious example is our main market is Source servers and Garry's Mod, TF2, CSGO. They're single-threaded applications, so this just comes down to the research once again. So they can only utilize kind of one core. Technically, that's not 100% true. If you want to argue that, I understand where people are coming from, but for the most part, the game thread can only use one core. You want to use CPUs, which have really high single core clock speeds, and it isn't purely just down to the clock speed. There's other stuff that comes into it, like the CPU architecture. This is a real kind of market research area, and generally you can find that other hosts will talk about this stuff. They'll want to be kind of defending the hardware they use on blog posts and stuff because people question them about it. So that just comes down to market research once again. With Source and games like that, generally the most popular and demanded core is the i7-4790K currently, but that will be shifting to the i7-6700K probably very within the next 6 months. It will just kind of continue down the i7 route until a much better single core clock speed CPU comes along. But with things like Minecraft, for example, which we don't currently host, so this isn't speaking from experience here now, this is just speaking from what I've heard, who I've spoken to, those games generally run better on things like the E3 and E5 processors because they can utilize multi-threaded kind of CPUs, and not only that, they're a bit more intensive on the RAM than the CPU. Games like Garry's Mod and stuff, they'll only hit up to 4 gigs max. They can't actually use more than that. Minecraft servers could quite easily hit up to 16, 32 gigs. So you really kind of change the server build depending on what application you're running. And you don't want to be deploying Garry's Mod, CSGO, and all these different types of game on the same servers because you can't properly load balance it. So you want to start slow. You want to target a game which isn't being hosted very well by the big boys, and then you want to slowly expand out, and you want to also build your infrastructure to respect that. So if you're branching out to say Minecraft next, you don't want to use the i7s and stuff for Minecraft. So yeah, that's a question regarding hardware. How do you manage the dedicated servers? This one's a kind of like trivial question. You manage the server the same way you manage a singular server. And if you have really no idea how to do that, you should probably mess around with things like VPS first before you actually start the host. VPS on Linux, for example. Linux is probably the operating system you want to use where you can, unless the apps obviously only run on Windows. Like Blackwake, for example, I'm fairly sure only runs on Windows right now. That depends on obviously the operating system, generally SSH, and there are certain softwares you can use to centralize the kind of command and control, and you can send out commands on a mass scale to all, but generally that's a point of failure. If that system gets broken into at any point, they have access to every DEDI. Yeah, you want to generally try and avoid that, in my opinion. Obviously though, when you do get to a seriously large scale and you're handling upward of 50 to 100 DEDIs, you may have no other option really. When you need to deploy something across the entire network, it's not practical to log into every single DEDI and do that. So you might at some point want some sort of command and control system like that. But at the start, yeah, I'd just recommend individually doing it, logging into each server with SSH, or if you're using Windows, Remote Desktop Protocol, just doing it on an individual basis. How do you manage billing? So billing is a kind of touchy one in my opinion, well, finance in general. So if you're starting up a host purely to get money, you're probably not going to succeed. And the reason is because it's a very competitive market. Really, to break into it, it's a lot of work, it takes a long time, and it's not going to be worth it for at least the first 5 years. Unless you're lucky, of course, and you have, some really kind of effective, kind of cutting edge. But we use a software called WHMCS, and most hosts use this. It's a really good software for kind of billing with hosts. It's built for it really, and it works really well. WHMCS is a pretty good software. And kind of going back to the first question, how do you get started? With WHMCS, obviously you want to keep your costs all down when you get started. So you don't want to be spending 100 plus on some logo design and like whatever on some fancy custom website. It's not worth it. You want to go with some website type theme, unless you design websites yourself, or you can get it done really cheap by like a mate. Templates and stuff like that, you can buy them, put them together really nicely, take your time to do it, and they can generally plug into WHMCS if you once again did the homework. And they tie into WHMCS really nicely, and it looks very professional, sleek, it's very easy to do, and that's how we manage billing, using a software called WHMCS, and that does most of the donkey work for you. You really shouldn't be focusing on the money. We really, currently, we really don't focus on the money. Obviously, cash flow to a level is important. We need to make sure we can afford our bills. Other than that, I don't monitor the cash flow. I really don't. I don't know exactly how much each daddy's making. I don't know which games are making the most, that kind of stuff. Some people are really into that. They're into crunching the numbers. I'm more of a practical guy, and obviously going back to the question of when do you start bringing people in, we've only recently brought in our first real kind of first employee. Obviously not being fully paid though, because that's stupid at this point. You want to get the company at least 10 times bigger before you start focusing on that stuff. So yeah, billing, finance, that's a touchy one. Some people are super into the numbers and stuff. I'm really bad with numbers. I get as involved as I need to, and other than that, I'm quite hands off with that stuff. And that's something which, for example, I would want to bring somebody into to kind of manage, keep an eye on at some point when we start getting bigger. This is an interesting one actually. How do you have time to answer everyone's questions, and how should you answer them? So this kind of ties into PR a little bit. So this video, for example, is one way I answer people's questions. It depends on the medium. So you have Twitter and Facebook. People are asking you questions through them. You really want to engage with people. People love that shit. They just love it. Check your social medias very frequently. The company, obviously not your own. You shouldn't be doing that. You should be focusing on building the company. But yeah, check the company's Facebook. Keep it open. Reply to messages as fast as you can. Facebook actually gives you a little badge when you're really quick at replying. Twitter is very similar. So you just really want to engage with people, essentially. And this is essentially a marketing method in and of itself. It's called word of mouth. You want people to have a good experience, because when they have a good experience, they'll tell their friends. And when they tell their friends, their friends might use you, and so on. And it kind of snowballs. So you really want to utilize that where you can. With tickets and support, obviously you also want to reply as fast as you can there too, because they're the paying customers. If you use things like Steam, you want to reply, you want to speak to people, you want to be as friendly as you possibly can be. This actually ties into a really interesting question, which is there anything I would have done differently? So it's very difficult to do that, to answer everybody's questions and be very on the ball, very friendly, very consistent. It drains you, very exhausting. And in fact, it really lines up with the video that was being spoken about a lot a while ago on YouTube, which is PewDiePie's kind of fake happiness video, where should people be faking happiness and all that kind of stuff. You've really got to do that as much as you can, and you've also got to notice when you're unable to do that, and you've got to go to bed. You've got to disengage. You've got to leave it, just numb out how you're feeling. If you're feeling pissed off with some other situation, you just cannot let that follow over to another customer or even person you're speaking to, as much as you possibly can. And this is a learning curve for everybody really, especially the younger people. It's quite hard to control this stuff. So any regrets I've made yet, this is one place that I've personally messed up, and I've said some things that I probably shouldn't have said, or no, I quite obviously shouldn't have said. Yeah, it's interesting. Don't ever let when you mess up kind of push you back. Every successful businessman really fucks up multiple times too. That it won't be your first time, it won't be your last time. You'll keep on fucking up. What is very critical is then how you handle that fuck up, and at least how you then learn from. One very real example is I said something that I shouldn't have to a customer, not of Trident, and how I then reacted at that time. Also, how I dealt with, once I'd said what I shouldn't said, how I then dealt with it on a kind of PR, public relations level. That also wasn't perfect. But what is very important, and probably the most valuable thing from those kinds of fuck ups, you learn from it, because you can't put a price on that. If you can recognize I fucked up here and I could do better here, but rather than just bullshitting yourself and kind of treading along, that's a lesson, and you can't put a price on that. So yeah, that's how I'd answer that one, I guess. Why did you choose to start a hosting company? One of the kind of key reasons that I did that was probably because it just kind of fitted a hole that I noticed in the market. I noticed that there wasn't enough people doing what I needed exactly, which was back then DDoS mitigation with Gary's. So I figured I'll do that myself as much as I can, and I guess other people might want to buy it. And that happened. Now my focus has shifted away from that specific niche. I'd 100% say notice gaps that you want filled in the market, and try your best to do that. Obviously, you can't spread yourself across every single possible company, and there will be some things that you can't do. You can't execute on it. You haven't got the right skills, and that's something which is just subjective. You've really got to recognize when you can do something. Take action. If you enjoy it too, that's a bonus. How much does business and college, school link up with the real thing? So this is a pretty interesting one. I haven't got too much experience with, business courses and stuff like that in college. I never took one in at least college. However, I do have a lot of mates who have, and they speak to me about it quite a lot. I think most of the stuff that they teach you in these courses is bullshit. They really teach you how to run big business, from what I've heard. With startups, you've got to do a lot of corner cutting to a degree. Obviously, you don't want the corners you cut to affect the actual product quality and the customer service quality. They're the two critical things. But regarding your own back end, kind of like, what's going on behind the scenes, you've got to try and really cut that down as much as you can. Don't worry too much about, dotting your I's and crossing the T's. You want to just get things rolling. And once things are actually, going well, and you're starting to get at least some feedback as to what you're doing is working, or what isn't working, then you need to just start responding. You need to try a lot of things, and you need to really quickly learn what isn't working and pull back from that. And yeah, I think that's kind of one of the things that a lot of startups, especially in the hosting industry, concern themselves with too much. They think, oh, if I followed this book to the complete T and get everything perfect when it comes to starting up a company, everything will sail along smoothly. That isn't gonna help. Nobody gives a shit if nobody cares though, if you have to if your company is being run exactly to some sort of standard, or people don't really care that much. What they really care about is the quality of the product, reviews and stuff like that. You obviously want to also enable people to review your service, and yeah, just be transparent, I guess. There what you, in my opinion, should be focusing on there is creating content, improving the product, not wasting your time on trivial shit which you don't even know if you need that. You really want to focus on the more marketing side of things. If you're not very good at marketing, maybe look for people who are interested in that, that want to volunteer for the experience. Don't waste time on a shit ton of theory. If you want to try something, throw yourself at it. If it doesn't work out, you need to recognize that, you need to cut it, and you need to try something different. That's the real answer there, and I don't think they teach you that enough in business. They teach you that taking risk is very good, but they also talk too much about just the theory. You need to do. People do not do enough. They just talk, and this kind of ties into the last question. Well, second to last question, which is how do you keep yourself driven? How do you motivate yourself, and even the staff, I guess, that you're bringing in? I don't think this is something which can really be answered in a way that people expect. There's no magical way. You've got to love what you do. If you don't, and you don't have that motivation, tough shit. If everybody says that they want that $1 million yacht and, you know, all that fancy shit, but nobody puts the hours in. And if you want to be the next best thing and you really do want to change the game, you've got to work harder than them. Fact. Like, there is no other way about it. I see so many kids that, you know, they'll start up a company or a project or even a host, and then, you know, they'll kit out the website and all that kind of stuff. It can accept payments, and then they'll jump on GTA and play that for 3 fucking hours. That isn't gonna make you any money. That isn't gonna make things work. That's just lazy. You should be spending all of your time focusing on the one important thing. When you're like 20, yeah, sure, you know, you'd have made yourself, you would hopefully got yourself in a comfortable position where you can then play GTA for 3-4 hours and not give a fuck. And if you want to do it, then go ahead. But right now, you've got to focus on building the company. You've got to focus on building foundation. And I guess that's one thing that a lot of people fuck up. And I totally blame the system to a degree. It's not going to be easy. They kind of make it out like that. Not at all. If you're starting your own company, you've got to work 10 times harder than every fucker. You've got to pay yourself less than every fucker. You've got to reinvest more than everyone else. And that's the only way it's going to work, unless, you know, you're lucky and you hit that gold mine like Snapchat or Facebook, where it's just a spark and you ignite it, and you're kind of just lucky that you were there to see it. Chances are that isn't going to happen in the hosting market because it's already relatively aged. And that kind of goes into the last point a little bit, which is exit strategy. Entrepreneurship is really, it's not about building one big company and then having that set you for life. And if that one company doesn't work out, maybe try something else. Obviously, you know, if it really isn't working out, try something else. But if it is at least working and there's, you know, something going on and maybe it's generating at least some income, you shouldn't give up. You should keep on hammering at it until you work out your exit strategy, and then you execute that once you're really sure on that. But you want to start thinking of that before you need to exit. You want to be prepared to jump ship. You want to be one step ahead of the game. So you've got to kind of prepare an exit strategy to a degree, and I think that's pretty undervalued. Entrepreneurship is really jumping from vine to vine, I guess, is a pretty good way to put it. There is no one definitive thing. Do that as best you can, and if you see an opportunity which is better, then try and leap to that. But it might not work out, so obviously you don't want to just totally drop off your last projects. So yeah, I guess that's the exit strategy question. What else we're kind of going to be going over in this series type thing will be how to kind of configure the actual technical stuff, so like installing WHMCS, getting the website set up, you know, where you should buy a template if you want to do that. Also, you have things like logos and company names. There's a lot of marketing kind of theory to go over, and obviously I'm no expert. Look at me, I'm only 17, so I almost got my age there, but this is just from personal experience to help people who I know who are actually running hosts, and obviously if anybody else on the internet finds this useful, that's great. Other than that, keep driven.